much for that kind introduction, and thank you. Terry, thanks for your hard work with the Legislative Committee. Travis, thanks for all of your hard work with the Chamber. You know, I think back 4 years ago when I started this journey running for Congress, and actually it was 5 years ago when we were running the campaign, and one of the first people I met with was, and the first group I met was the Lancaster Fairfield Chamber of Commerce. And many of you folks I know, I've got to know over the years. My wife and I have got to know. We've made many friends in this room that we're very proud of, and that's something you can't take, we'll take with us everywhere we go. You can't take away from us. But I want to commend the Chamber for the great work they do and the hard work that all of you do as members of the Chamber. And I'm going to try and talk a little bit about how important that is, especially with the environment that we're facing right now in Washington, D.C. But I also want to recognize our elected officials. As I walked around this room, we have elected officials that were here 4 years ago when I got first elected, and newly elected officials like Dave Levacy, who's sitting back there looking the other way. But I want to thank you for your hard work and your service, because people don't realize sometimes the commitment, the dedication, the time they take out of their own personal time and family time that they give back to their community. And let's give them a round of applause for their service. You know, it's unfortunate because of redistricting that where I'm not able to continue the journey here in Fairfield County. But I'm still going to be around. As I walked around this room, the number one question was, what are you going to do after you retire at the end of the year? And I can tell you that my wife and I are exploring all the opportunities out there, trying to figure out what's the best opportunity, what's the best path for my family and myself. But I will tell you, we're going to still be in Ohio, and we're going to still be around Fairfield County and be part of this community, because it's a wonderful community to be part of, and there's great opportunities here as well. Let me also introduce my staff, because we could not get the things that we've gotten done in Fairfield County without an outstanding staff. And I was very blessed when I came to Congress to have a very experienced staff that moved, some that stayed with me in Lancaster, others who came on with other experience. And I want to introduce those folks. First, my district director, Bob Clark, who has over 20-some years working for over those 20 years for 3 different congressmen, bringing that expertise, that experience into the congressional office. He's done a great job. Kathleen Young, who was very active in the Republican Party here in Fairfield County, but more importantly had a small business right here in Fairfield County and understood what small business owners were facing, what they were going through. Brandon Meyer used to work for me. He's sitting right there. So, and he brought his expertise on the military side. And Brandon Ogden, who also lives here with his family, understands, again, the challenges that you all are faced with and helping constituents every day in our office. And Rachel Elsa, who worked for Congressman Dave Hobson prior to myself, that expertise is still in our office today, has really been, I think, a valuable asset for me as a congressman, hopefully helping all of you throughout the last 4 years with some of the challenges and issues that you are faced with. In addition to that, I've got Don Tate, retired Master Sergeant from the Air Force back there, and Dave Landon, attorney, who also does is my communications director with us as well. And let's give them a round of applause. They do wonderful work in our office. You know, I was thinking on my drive over 4 years ago the challenges that we were faced with. And quite honestly, those challenges are not much different than today. You know, I think back to the teletown halls that we had, the small business forums, the chamber events, and the conversations that I had with many of you in this room. And I think back 4 years ago to today, many of those same issues, those same concerns you're faced with as small business owners and as hardworking families. And I can tell you that we are still in a very uncertain environment right now, a very difficult environment in Washington, D.C., and I know Congressman Stivers is going to speak right after me, and he can talk a little bit more about this environment that we're faced with and give you his perspective. But, you know, I think back just a few weeks ago on election night, and you all know I'm a Republican. I'm not going to get political, Travis, so you don't have to kick me out of here. But I woke up the next morning, and didn't get much sleep that night. Rolled over and looked at Eileen. I said, here we are 2 years later, billions of dollars that were spent, on television and radio, all this negative advertising that the American people were sick and tired of. All the forums that we had, the people telling us how they were upset with what was happening in our nation, upset with the policies that were out there, yet waking up 2 years later and having pretty much status quo. A Republican House, a Democrat Senate, and President Obama in the White House. And then I started thinking about the conversations I had with folks like you. And most of those conversations didn't include Republicans or Democrats. It included the policies that you all were facing, the challenges and concerns that you all were facing. And I think this election was not about Republicans and Democrats. 2008, clearly it was. When I came into office, the Democrats pretty much won everything. The American people voted Republicans out, I think probably because of all the borrowing and spending that was going on. In 2010, we saw the opposite. The Democrats were all voted out. Congressman Stivers came in with a big class. I think there was 80-some members in that freshman class that he came in with. But this last election, we saw was status quo. The American people weren't willing to make a change at this point. But what I do sense is that the American people are watching Washington closer today than they ever have before. Because you're feeling it. You're feeling it in your own pocketbooks. You're feeling it with your businesses at home. And as I also think back to these seminars and forums and workshops that we had and teletown halls and regular town halls, if I had to pick out a single word that I heard throughout the 8 counties that we conducted these in, and we heard a lot, and it was clearly about jobs and the economy, but that single issue or that single word was uncertainty. And I think as small businesses, you all know how to react to good news, how to react to bad news. I was a financial advisor before I got into politics and had my own small business. And the markets could react to good news, to bad news. But when it comes to uncertainty, that's what creates a very dangerous environment. And that's what we're faced with in Washington right now. The 5 areas that I heard mostly about that causing that uncertainty, regardless of where I was, regardless if we were here in Fairfield County, next door in Perry County, over in Clark County and Springfield, there's a lot of manufacturing, or over on the other side of the district in Greene County, where we have Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, the largest single-site employer in the state of Ohio. There were certain things that came up at every one of these small business forums that we did in August throughout the district. The number one area was the uncertainty in Washington. It was the spending in Washington, the borrowing and the spending. Today we are borrowing nearly 40 cents on every dollar we spend in Washington. And that's unacceptable. You could not run your business that way. Families can't run their own households that way. Yet that's the way Washington is running today. When you have trillion-dollar deficits, when you have a $16 trillion debt, and what that means to all of you in this room, to your children, to your grandchildren, that your share to our national creditors is approximately $50,000 per person. And that's unacceptable. We're passing that on to future generations, and that's creating a tremendous amount of uncertainty in our financial markets, in our financial institutions. And one of the biggest concerns we hear in our office is small businesses trying to get the financing, the credit they need to continue their business, or sometimes keep their doors open, and they're faced with those challenges. The second area is the tax structure. You look at the tax structure we have here today, that we have in our nation today. The tax structure that we have today is costing businesses a tremendous amount of money, and it's hurting businesses. You often hear the saying that in Washington, and I believe this is true, that we have a spending problem, not a revenue problem. And I think if you really start looking closely at what's happening, I served on the Budget Committee, I currently serve on the Appropriations Committee, that is absolutely true, and we could argue that all day, and I think there's a strong argument to be made on behalf of our small businesses. Third area is our federal government. You look at the regulations that are being put on our businesses. Somebody handed me a note as I walked in, we were talking about this, that over the past 3 years, between 2009 and 2011, the Code of Federal Regulation has expanded by 11,300 pages, a 7.4% increase. And by the way, those statistics are coming from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. The regulations that are being put on our business today by the federal government is hurting businesses and killing jobs. And finally, actually, fourth area is an energy plan. Getting an energy plan in place where we have less reliance on foreign oil and we're using all the domestic energy that we have available here across our country. You look at where our energy is coming today, what we're most dependent on with oil, is the Middle East. Look at the instability right now in the Middle East and the risk that we're running with this energy policy well, we don't even have an energy policy, this energy plan that's out there right now under this administration. I think it's irresponsible, the fact that I'm standing here 4 years later and that we don't have an energy policy in place in this country that's more relying more on domestic energy. And finally, the fifth area I hear is the new health care reform plan, also referred to sometimes as Obamacare, and the challenges that small businesses are facing with this new expansion of government into our health care system. The Supreme Court ruled and made it very clear that these penalties that were argued for almost a year were really taxes, and they were being implemented as a tax. And if you look at the number of taxes in this plan over the next 10 years, I think there was numbers out there, I've seen numbers as high as $525 billion of new taxes. And that will be put primarily on our small businesses' shoulders to carry that burden to expanding this government. So we are faced with a tremendous challenge there. So those are the areas that I hear most from you that are creating the uncertainty in today's economy. And how are we going to deal with this? Well, a couple things. The start will be this lame duck session. We have got a tremendous challenge this lame duck session. I'm going to turn some of this over to Steve because I don't want to say everything, Steve. We're going to leave you with something. But the three areas that we're going to be faced with are going to be the tax cuts that went in place under the Bush era that are set to expire in January 1st. Sequestration, which was put in place under the Budget Control Act, that has, in my opinion, disproportionately cuts our military and raises a lot of questions as far as the future of our military and our defense if this goes into effect. And other issues, including, I think in this area, the Farm Bill is a big one as well. So we've got a very busy lame duck session ahead of us, and maybe one of the most busiest in recent history. If it does become very busy, I think that's a good thing. That means that this Republican Congress and this Democrat Senate and President Obama are working together to try to move something forward. If suddenly people walk the other way, we're going to have a very big crisis that we're going to be faced with at the end of this year. I can tell you that our side is very committed to working with the White House and working with the Senate to try to move this forward. It's what the American people want, and try to keep this country from going off a fiscal cliff and trying to deal with our national defense issue. Just to summarize this, if you look at the Bush cuts, that if they were allowed to expire, it would impact everyone in this room. The average Ohioan would face an increase of over $2,000 in federal tax increases. And that came from the taxfoundation.org. The number of tax rates would increase in addition to the income tax, including the federal estate tax, which I know impacts small businesses and especially our farmers, which will go from 35% to 55%. And the exemption for that tax would be reduced from $5.1 million to $1 million. The capital gains tax, another area that would go up, would increase from 15% to at least 20%. With corporate, and also then you have corporate tax rates on top of that. So we can go on and on and on. The bottom line is, and this came from very credible sources, and I'm going to quote a source from Ernst & Young, says that approximately as many as 710,000 jobs could be directly impacted by this. We could have that many fewer jobs if these tax hikes were to go into effect in January. In other words, if we did not deal with this issue and extend those tax cuts, we would see a massive tax hike in January that could put in jeopardy or at risk as many as 710,000 jobs being lost. When you look at the impact of that, it's huge. So we have a tremendous responsibility in Congress to deal with this. So how do we deal with this? That's a challenge. How do we deal when you've got a Congress who's already passed legislation that said we would like to see these tax cuts extended. I'd like to see them extended long-term wise, maybe permanent, to bring some certainty to the markets. But we've extended them 1 year in the House. That bill's sitting over in the Senate. We have a president who says, no, we need to let them expire on the upper income folks, so to speak, $250,000 and higher, which impacts many of our small business owners, which I believe would hurt our economy tremendously by allowing that to happen. How do we come to a compromise on this and work through this process? How do we deal with sequestration, where you have $500 billion of cuts that are aimed towards our national defense? And I serve on the Appropriations Committee. I serve on MILCON and Veterans Affairs. And I can tell you our generals have come forward and said this would seriously alter our national defense if this were to take place. They can operate within the current budget constraints that's before them right now, but you add this on top of that over the next 10 years, and if you put it in proportion, we're talking about approximately 17% of our discretionary income is aimed at the military, yet 50% of the cuts are aimed at the military. And it would seriously alter our national defense the way it's done today. So we have that. That's a serious issue that must be dealt with by the end of the year, or it will kick in January 1st and we begin sequestration. There are other bills out there, the Farm Bill and other bills that we're trying to work on to try to move this process forward. But I know I've spoken too long. Let me just close by saying that over the next month and a half, in the next 4 years, we're going to have some challenging times. And I would encourage you all as a chamber to continue to stay strong as a chamber, to stay united. I was just talking to Jared back there, who's the new marketing person here, and his job is to try to expand and grow the chamber with other members of the chamber. It's important that you all work together with one voice. It's important that you engage in the legislative and the political process, because you can make a difference. Some folks have referred to the chamber and small businesses in general as a sleeping giant. If you ever wake up this giant, if you would all ever come together with one voice with our small businesses, you create 70 to 80% of the jobs across this country, you can certainly impact policies, you can impact the legislative process, you can impact the political process. So I would encourage you to continue to be strong, continue your faith, and continue to move forward and be a doer, and we got to get it done. Thank you very much for having me.